The envelope arrived at Dean Martin's Beverly Hills home on a Tuesday morning in March 1972, delivered by a courier who refused to give his name and disappeared before the housekeeper could ask any questions. Inside were 12 photographs that could have destroyed one of the most beloved entertainers in America, images taken with telephoto lenses through hotel windows, capturing private moments that no public figure would want the world to see. Attached to the photographs was a single sheet of expensive letterhead bearing the name Vincent Torrino, an independent film producer who specialized in exploitation films and moral corruption. The message was brief and devastating. "Mr. Martin, these pictures tell an interesting story. Call me if you'd like to discuss how we can keep this story private. Otherwise, I'm sure the tabloids would pay handsomely for such exclusive content." What Vincent Torrino didn't know was that Dean Martin had been playing poker with dangerous men since he was 16 years old. What Torrino couldn't have imagined was that Dean had survived 30 years in Hollywood by understanding exactly how power really worked, who really controlled information, and what happened to people who mistook kindness for weakness. The blackmail attempt that Torrino thought would make him rich and powerful would instead teach him the most expensive lesson of his life: some people can't be threatened because they're more dangerous than the people trying to threaten them. Vincent Torrino was everything that was wrong with 1970s Hollywood condensed into one perfectly despicable human being. He was a producer who had never produced anything of artistic or commercial value, a businessman who made his living by exploiting other people's weaknesses, and a predator who specialized in finding leverage over celebrities and using it to advance his own career. Torrino owned a small production company called Midnight Films that made cheap horror movies and pornographic features, but his real business was information brokering, collecting compromising material on Hollywood figures and using it to secure financing, distribution deals, and sexual favors from people who couldn't afford to have their secrets revealed. Torrino had been watching Dean Martin for months, hiring private investigators to document his private life, bribing hotel employees to report on his activities, and building a dossier that he believed would give him permanent power over one of the entertainment industry's most valuable assets. The photographs in the envelope represented the culmination of this surveillance operation, clear evidence of behavior that, while not illegal, would have been personally embarrassing and professionally damaging if made public. But Torrino had made a fundamental miscalculation. He had assumed that Dean Martin was like every other celebrity he had successfully blackmailed over the years, vain, frightened, and willing to pay any price to protect his public image. Instead, he was about to discover that Dean Martin was something much more dangerous, a man who understood that the best defense against blackmail wasn't payment or negotiation, but counterattack. The phone call came exactly 24 hours after the envelope was delivered. Dean answered it himself, having sent his staff home early, and disconnected his other lines to ensure privacy. "Mr. Martin." Torrino's voice was smooth and confident, the tone of a man who believed he held all the cards. "I trust you received my package yesterday." "I got your pictures, Vince," Dean replied, his voice carrying its usual casual warmth. "Some of them are actually pretty good. You've got a decent photographer working for you." Torrino was momentarily thrown by Dean's relaxed response. He had expected panic, denial, or immediate capitulation. Instead, he was getting what sounded like professional critique. "Mr. Martin, I think perhaps you don't fully understand the implications of what those photographs represent. If they were to be published in the right publications, they could be quite damaging to your reputation and career." Dean lit a cigarette and leaned back in his leather chair, looking out at the swimming pool where his children had played when they were young. "Vince, can I call you Vince? Here's what I think you don't understand. I'm 54 years old. I've been famous for 30 years. Do you really think there's anything about my private life that's going to surprise anyone at this point?" The confidence in Torrino's voice began to waver slightly. "These particular photographs show you in situations that your fans might find disappointing. The family man image, the wholesome entertainer persona that you've cultivated, it could all be destroyed." Dean laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that carried no trace of nervousness or fear. "Vince, you've been in Hollywood long enough to know that wholesome entertainer personas are marketing tools, not reality. My fans aren't idiots. They know I'm not actually a choir boy. If anything, they'd probably be disappointed if I was." This wasn't going according to Torrino's script. Every other celebrity he had blackmailed had immediately begun negotiating, offering money, film roles, business partnerships, anything to keep their secrets private. Dean Martin seemed genuinely unconcerned about having his secrets revealed. Mr. Martin, let me be more direct. I'm prepared to sell these photographs to the highest bidder, unless we can reach a mutually beneficial arrangement. I'm confident that several tabloid publications would pay substantial amounts for exclusive access to this material. Dean's voice remained perfectly calm, but something subtle shifted in his tone, a slight cooling that suggested the conversation was about to take a different direction. What kind of arrangement did you have in mind, Vince? Torrino's confidence returned as he moved into the demands phase of his operation. I'm developing a new film project, a serious dramatic piece that would be perfect for an established star looking to demonstrate his range. I think you'd be ideal for the lead role. Of course, your participation would ensure that these photographs never see the light of day. And if I'm not interested in your film project, then I'm afraid I'll have no choice but to explore other options for monetizing this material. Dean Martin took a long drag from his cigarette and made a decision that would haunt Vincent Torrino for the rest of his life. Vince, I appreciate the offer, but I'm going to have to pass on your movie. Go ahead and sell the pictures, but you should know something before you do. The silence that followed was charged with tension. Torrino sensed that the dynamic of the conversation had suddenly shifted, but he couldn't figure out how or why. What should I know, Mr. Martin? Dean's voice became conversational again, almost friendly. I should mention that I have some pictures of my own. Much better pictures, actually, much more interesting. Torrino felt the first flutter of real concern. Pictures of what? Pictures of you, Vince. Pictures of you and Senator Patricia Kellerman's 14-year-old daughter. Pictures of you and the wife of federal judge William Morrison. Pictures of you and some very interesting pharmaceutical transactions that I don't think the DEA would approve of. Pictures of you doing things that would make my little photo collection look like vacation snapshots. The phone line went completely silent. Torrino's breathing had stopped entirely. Dean continued in the same casual tone, as if he were discussing the weather. See, Vince, the thing about blackmail is that it only works if you're the only person with compromising information. But you're not the only person with compromising information. You're not even the person with the most compromising information. How did you? Torrino's voice was barely a whisper. How did I get pictures of you? Same way you got pictures of me. I hired photographers. I paid hotel employees. I built a dossier. The difference is, my pictures are of actual crimes, not just embarrassing personal behavior. My pictures could put you in federal prison for the rest of your life. Torrino was struggling to breathe. His entire blackmail operation was based on the assumption that he was the predator, and his targets were the prey. The idea that he might be someone else's prey had never occurred to him. But here's the thing, Vince, Dean continued, his voice taking on an almost gentle quality. I don't really want to destroy your life. I'm not in the business of ruining people, so I'm going to make you a counteroffer. What kind of offer? Torrino's voice was shaking now. You're going to destroy every copy of every photograph you have of me. You're going to fire your investigators. You're going to shut down your little surveillance operation. And you're going to get out of the blackmail business entirely. And if I do all that, then my pictures of you disappear forever, you walk away clean, and we never speak again. Torrino was silent for nearly a full minute, processing the complete reversal of his situation. He had entered this phone call, believing he was about to become rich and powerful. Instead, he was learning that he had been playing a game where he didn't even know the rules. How do I know you won't use those pictures against me anyway? Dean's response was immediate and definitive. Because I'm not you, Vince. I don't make my living by destroying people. But make no mistake, if you ever try anything like this again, with me or with anyone else, those pictures will find their way to the appropriate authorities. The threat was delivered without anger or dramatic emphasis, which somehow made it even more terrifying. Torrino understood that he wasn't being intimidated or coerced. He was being given a choice between walking away voluntarily or being destroyed professionally and personally. What about my investment? Torrino asked desperately. I've spent months and thousands of dollars building this case against you. Dean's laugh was genuinely amused. Vince, you just learned one of the most valuable lessons in business. Sometimes your investment doesn't pay off. Sometimes you bet on the wrong horse. Sometimes you pick the wrong target. This is one of those times. The conversation ended with Torrino agreeing to Dean's terms. Within 48 hours, a courier delivered a package containing all the original photographs, negatives, and surveillance files that Torrino had compiled. A week later, Torrino's private investigation team was fired, and his surveillance operation was shut down. But Dean Martin's response to Torrino's blackmail attempt went beyond simply neutralizing the immediate threat. Within 2 weeks of their phone conversation, Vincent Torrino discovered that his business was collapsing from multiple directions simultaneously. His film distribution deals were being canceled, his investors were pulling out of his projects, his contacts at the tabloid publications were no longer returning his calls. What Torrino didn't understand was that Dean Martin's counterattack hadn't been limited to threatening him with compromising photographs. Dean had also quietly informed several powerful people in the entertainment industry about Torrino's blackmail operation, describing it not as a personal vendetta, but as a threat to everyone who worked in Hollywood. Studio executives, talent agents, and media moguls who had been potential targets of Torrino's schemes suddenly understood that they had a mutual interest in ensuring that he could no longer operate effectively. The result was a coordinated but informal industry blacklist that effectively ended Torrino's career without anyone officially declaring war on him. He simply found that doors that had been open to him were now closed, that people who had taken his calls were now unavailable, and that opportunities that should have existed had somehow evaporated. Vincent Torrino left Hollywood 6 months later, bankrupt and broken. He moved to Phoenix and tried to start a legitimate production company, but his reputation had followed him. He spent the rest of his career making industrial training films and low-budget commercials, never again attempting to blackmail or extort anyone. The photographs that Torrino had believed would make him rich were never published. Dean Martin never spoke publicly about the blackmail attempt, treating it as a private business matter that had been resolved satisfactorily, but word of how he had handled the situation spread through Hollywood like wildfire, serving as a warning to other potential blackmailers and reinforcing Dean's reputation as someone who was much more dangerous than he appeared. The story became part of Hollywood legend, not the specific details which were too sensitive to discuss openly, but the general principle that Dean Martin was not someone you wanted as an enemy. Directors who had considered trying to manipulate him reconsidered their approach. Executives who had thought about pressuring him found other ways to achieve their goals. Even organized crime figures who had always treated Dean with respect became even more careful to maintain positive relationships with him. But the most important lesson of the Torrino affair wasn't about Dean's capacity for strategic revenge. It was about his understanding of how information really worked in Hollywood. Torrino had assumed that having compromising photographs gave him power over Dean. But Dean understood that power in Hollywood came not from having secrets, but from having the right relationships with the people who controlled access to platforms, financing, and opportunities. When Dean informed industry leaders about Torrino's blackmail operation, he wasn't asking them to take revenge on his behalf. He was providing them with valuable intelligence about a threat to their own interests. Torrino's downfall wasn't the result of Dean's personal vendetta, it was the natural consequence of an entire industry recognizing that blackmail operations were bad for business. Dean Martin had defeated Vincent Torrino, not by being more ruthless or more criminal, but by being more intelligent about how power actually functioned in their shared environment. He had turned Torrino's attempted exploitation into a valuable service to the community, demonstrating that the best way to neutralize a predator was to make everyone aware that the predator existed. The blackmail attempt that was supposed to make Vincent Torrino rich and powerful instead taught him that some people can't be threatened because they understand something that most people don't. In a world built on relationships and reputation, the person who protects the community's interests will always defeat the person who threatens them. Dean Martin had protected himself by protecting everyone else, and in doing so, he had demonstrated the kind of leadership that makes people want to follow you rather than fear you. It was a masterclass in power that Vincent Torrino would remember for the rest of his life, even if he never fully understood what had been taught to him.